Chair of the FRMC representing the City of National City. We welcome members of the public, community power staff, and committee members joining us in person at the Port of San Diego boardroom. I now call the meeting to order. Director Inzunza is participating in today's meeting remotely under amendments to the Brown Act. Welcome, Director Inzunza. Are you there? Do you have any statement to read?
Madam Chair, he's not online, so he's not participating. It doesn't look like he is.
Thank you. I
Okay.
understand he's not feeling well, so please call the roll, Madam Secretary.
Director Insunza, Vice Chair Suzuki,
Here.
Chair Yamani.
Here.
We had quorum.
Thank you. Let us all please stand and face the flag for the Pledge of Allegiance. You ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Oops. Next, we acknowledge this meeting is taking place on the land of the original inhabitants of the Greater San Diego region. A land acknowledgement is a critical step toward working with Native communities to create meaningful partnerships and inclusion in the stewardship and protection of their cultural resources and homelands. Let's take a moment to honor these ancestral grounds that were the traditional lands of the Kumeyaay. Thank you so much. Madam Secretary, are there any items to be added, withdrawn, or reordered on the agenda?
There are none, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We move on to our non-agenda public comment. We will now take up non-agenda public comments. Any written public comments submitted before the FRMC meeting were emailed to committee members prior to the meeting and will be posted on the website. Madam Secretary, do we have any non-agenda public comment?
We have none, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We will now move on to our consent calendar. Item 1, approve November 13, 2025 meeting minutes. Do any committee members wish to pull the consent calendar item? Madam Secretary, do we have any public comment on the consent calendar?
We do not, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any member of the committee for comments, questions, or a motion on consent item number 1?
Move to approve.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I will second that. Any other comments? None. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Vice Chair Suzuki,
Aye.
Chair Yamani.
Aye.
Motion carries, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We will now move on to our regular agenda items. We'll now go to item number 2, Treasurer reports for period ending September 30, 2025. Dr. Eric Washington, our Chief Financial Officer, Treasurer, and Dan Delaney from Chandler Asset Management will present this item. Madam Secretary, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do not, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll turn, are there any? Not yet, but I'll turn it to you, Dr. Washington.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, to staff and the general public. For the record, I'm Dr. Eric Washington, Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer at San Diego Community Power. I'm joined today by Dan Delaney, our investment advisor from Chandler Asset Management. So I'm happy to report that this item covers the performance of the first 3 months into our fiscal year 2026 fiscal cycle with the budget comparison and the compliance of our investment portfolio. So we ended the period with a net position of just under $87 million year to date, contributed to the bottom line result, which did outpace our budget. We contributed net operating revenue that was slightly under budget of $466 million. We showed energy cost savings to the tune of $17.1 million, which was 5% under budget, which offset the under budget from our net operating revenue Also contributing to the bottom line result were professional services that came in slightly lower than budgeted. Also personnel costs that came in slightly under budget, which contributed to the bottom line result. Next slide, please. So this slide depicts where we landed in terms of contribution to our reserves. We ended the period with net cash, unrestricted cash and investments in the amount of just under $450 million, which put us about 90% to our reserve target for the period. Our reserve target for the period is $498 million. So we still have a ways to go in terms of building our reserves. When we add our availability to the line of credit, we ended up with $677 million, which landed us at 100 and next slide, please, Tim. 162 days cash on hand from an unrestricted cash and investments perspective. Next slide, please. At this point, I'd like to ask Dan Delaney to give us a presentation on our portfolio. Dan? And then I'll come back after his presentation, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and Vice Chair, members of the committee. Great to be back here and pleased to report that your investments are safe, very liquid, and producing very strong returns. We'll start with the economy. A brief overview that provides a backdrop for the portfolio. And go to the next slide. We start, as we always do, with the labor market backdrop. We're consumers of the economy, and job security and wage growth play a big part in determining consumption decisions. So the first chart, you can see that payroll, which is job creation, continues to slow. We are just out of a government shutdown, the longest on record, which has limited the data, but the data that we do have does show, again, this moderating trend. Some of the private payroll data we've got shows actually a worsening trend. And this is really as a result of living in a higher interest rate environment over the past few years. And then added to that, we've had the tariffs this year, in particular, have hurt small business hiring. So the labor market is slowing and the unemployment rate is rising. We're around 4.5% now. A couple of years ago, we were in the low 3%. So the trajectory is a higher unemployment rate, something that the Federal Reserve is very, very aware of when making their interest rate decisions. And we'll get to that. On the next slide, we can look at the other side of the Fed's dual mandate, which is inflation. Inflation's been sticky. Now, the target is 2%. And there's two measures that we depict here: CPI, which is the one that you're probably more familiar with. And then on the right-hand side, the Personal Consumption Expenditures Index, which is similar, but that's something that the Fed really looks at, slightly different components. But again, their target is around 2% price growth every year. And we're around 3%. Inflation has played a part in that. But their view is that it will be temporary. And what they are concerned of is that if the employment backdrop continues to slow, inflation should continue to slow as well. So they're not too concerned about inflation at this stage, even though it's still a little bit elevated in their interest rate decisions. And we can go to the next slide to talk about that. So chart on the right, Fed funds now is around 4%. If you remember, a couple of years ago, we peaked at around 5.5%. The Fed is in cutting mode. And so the question is, really, what is the magnitude and the timing? The timing has been a little bit uncertain because we haven't had a lot of data because of the shutdown. And also there's been some concerns about tariffs and how long lasting they will be. But the general bias of the Federal Reserve has been to lower rates. They lowered rates a couple times, September, October. We have a Fed decision in about 10 days. And we do expect them to cut rates again by a quarter point, which will take us down to 3.75%. Our house view is that into next year, rates will continue to fall and fall towards the low 3 to mid 3%. And it's an interesting political let's say, situation with the Fed right now, because the chair of the board, Jerome Powell, is going to leave his post in May. And of course, the administration gets to choose the next Fed chair. And there's some names being touted, and there's one which has become more prominent, which is Kevin Hassett, who's the current economic advisor. And whoever gets in that chair seat is likely to be very dovish, because that's what the administration wants. But it may not be what the bond market wants. So we've already seen some murmurs in the bond market with yields picking up that they may not like it. So ultimately, the bond market is all powerful. And we saw that during the tariff. So it'll be interesting to see who gets picked, how the bond market responds, and then what sort of rhetoric comes out of the new Fed chair to calm the bond market. That's certainly what we're watching. The next slide. This is what's happening to the market, and really this is what plays into the portfolio. So as the Fed is easing, shorter term rates are coming down. Those are more anchored to the Fed funds rate, but we are seeing longer term rates, 5 and 10-year treasuries, and even further out 30-year treasuries yields stay higher. And you can see on the right-hand side that curve, you look at the green line, that's the most latest print, is steepening. So our message to clients, and we said this in the last meeting, is continue to think about extending your maturities. If you have excess liquidity, start thinking about buying longer maturities to try and lock in these higher yields as shorter yields come down. And that's something that we have been working with staff to do. So we can go into the portfolio. And we have our objectives, of course, safety, liquidity, return. We have a benchmark, and our goal is to outperform the benchmark over time and add value to the agency. And then our strategy is really diversification. We are bound by code, which means we can only invest in very high quality asset classes, but we can diversify across those asset classes and earn some incremental return. Next slide. These are the most important pages for my presentation. You are compliant with your policy, and your policy is in great shape. As you know, we just reviewed it and made some updates, and you're compliant with code. And every year we review this for any changes to code to make sure that the policy is current. The next page and the next page, lots of different parameters here, all compliant. We can go to the next one. So this is a snapshot of the portfolio as of the end of September versus the end of June. You'll see that the average maturity of the portfolio, these are longer term investments, overall has increased from 72 to 93 million. If you looked at the portfolio today, it's just over 100 million, as staff has continued to deploy excess liquidity into longer term investments. I'll just point out a couple others. The average purchase yield is still relatively high, and that is so key in terms of thinking about future returns. Purchase yield of 4.2%, if you think rates over the next year are going to fall to 3%, the value of those investments should continue to increase. So again, I think staff has done a very good job of deploying funds at the right time, locking in these higher rates, and that is going to produce benefits over the next year in the near term. We can go to the next slide. So again, we're diversified across all these high quality asset classes. The core of it is treasuries, the safest and most liquid. Then around that, we build in incremental yield through mortgages, which are government guaranteed, AAA rated asset-backed securities, very high quality corporate bonds, all to provide that incremental return. Next slide. This is a rating snapshot across the 3 main agencies. I think we spoke about this last time when the US was finally downgraded by the last agency from AAA. The overall quality of the portfolio has in lockstep with that, fallen from AAA to AA, but in reality, we're very comfortable with the credit quality of the overall portfolio. It's extremely strong. Go to the next slide. As rates continue to fall, our strategy has really been to invest in longer term investments. We are limited by a maximum maturity of 5 years. And of course, we want to diversify from 1 to 5 years. But you can see here in the chart, and the portfolio is the green bars. We are pushing out our maturities further and further from 3, 4, and 5 years, again, to lock in these high yields before they come down. That's the strategy. And this portfolio has been going for a relatively short time. We're around the 1-year mark here, but the returns have been strong. You'll forgive my eyes there. I can see the number. I think it's 4.2%. or roughly around that, and that's outperforming the benchmark underneath by almost 50 basis points or 0.5%, so pretty strong relative performance. I will just point out that these are total returns. So total returns being the income that you generate from the interest from the coupons, plus any capital appreciation. And the next slide. That's it. I'm happy to take any questions on the economy or the portfolio.
Thank you, Mr. Delaney, for the presentation. Madam Chair, I would yield to see if there's any questions from the directors on this item, and then I've got some closing remarks to the treasurer's report.
Thank you, Dr. Washington. Before moving forward with that one, I would like to, welcome our council member and director, Inzunza, is also participating now. Thank you, Director Inzunza, for being able to participate remotely. Do you have any statement to read for us, sir?
Hi, how are you? This is Michael Inzunza. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, not feeling too well. I during my briefing yesterday, I informed staff that I need to work remotely, but I am here in my home.
Thank you. Is that Madam Secretary? Can you
Director Insunza, is there anyone over 18 in the room with you?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Insunza. I hope you feel well. I had that same thing last week. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Delaney, for that presentation. Do you have any question, directors, with regards to the presentation? Vice Chair?
No, I just wanted to say thank you because, yeah, you included a lot of information in there, and I appreciated it, especially the part about about Jerome Powell. So that'll be really interesting to see what transpires.
Yeah, you're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you, Mr. Delaney, for the presentation, and thank you for safeguarding, of course, with the very keen eyes of Tim and Dr. Washington. Nothing will pass up them. Dr. Washington, yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, thank you again, Mr. Delaney. Madam Chair, in closing, I just wanted to emphasize just how prudent staff has been in terms of managing our finances, identifying opportunities to cut and save costs within those cost centers that we have control over, and really just holding fast to our investment strategy while maintaining a high level of compliance over those investments. In closing, I'd like to also highlight the support that we continue to receive from our participants, our customers, allowing us to maintain a participation rate above 90% participation. So, Madam Chair, with that, I will yield to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Washington. Are there any comments from the directors with regards to the report from Dr. Washington? Vice Chair, Director? Seeing none, this is the recommendation is receive and file for period ending September 30, 2025. So do we have to, Madam Clerk, do we have to make a motion there or just?
There's no motion, Madam
Okay,
Chair.
thank you so much. We'll now go to item number 3, fiscal year end 24-25 performance review. Dr. Washington, Chief Financial Officer, Treasurer, will present this item. Mary, do we have any public comment?
We do not, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Washington, your turn, sir.
Thank you again. Thank you again, Madam Chair. Again, for the record, Dr. Eric Washington, Chief Financial Officer, Treasurer at San Diego Community Power. Really excited to provide this year-end review where we took a look at our audited financial statement for our fiscal year-end period, June 30, 2025, compared to our budget. And really, again, wanting to highlight the positive variances between our budget and our actual results for the year. Again, is really a demonstration of staff's prudent management of our financial funds and being really smart about ratepayer dollars. Contributing to that, also the performance of our investment portfolio. So we ended the fiscal year with a net position of about $67 million above what we had budgeted for the period. Contributing to that were operating revenues came in slightly above budget. The operating expenses, where we identified savings, primarily focusing on the non-energy expense savings. Cost of energy was really a subject of what the market, energy markets were doing. We're in an environment where supported potential savings in the cost of energy. And then again, the contribution from our investment portfolio. Next slide, please. So this slide really points to the contributions to our revenue. We beat our budget by about 2%, where we collected revenue in excess of 22 million, nearly 22 million above where we budgeted. That was attributed to higher demand from customers. The temperatures were higher, was a contribution. So that generated more sales. Also contributing to our operating revenue beat compared to the budget was lower than budgeted uncollectible accounts, which indicated that our customers are actually paying their bills. And then lastly, in our lowest cost product, Power Base, we budgeted for a 15% participation, where our actual participation was just over 1%. And so those contributed to the results. When we take a look at operating expenses, we saved the savings there were attributed to non-energy expense savings to the tune of about 15 million. Next slide, please. To the tune of about 15 million in non-energy cost savings. And as you can see here, all the contributors to those savings. I'd like to highlight professional services, where we are prudent in terms of how we engage our vendors and the spends on those. So staff has done an excellent job in terms of engaging, smart engagement to those vendors. Also, personnel costs, being mindful of those costs, also contributed to the non-energy cost savings. And then looking at our marketing outreach, where we saved nearly $1 million on the spend in that area. Next slide, please. So this slide really depicts our reserve bill from the very beginning. And so as you can see, we started in March of 2021 when we launched our program. And then over the years, you can see how that trajectory of our reserve bill has contributed to the financial stability of the agency through our fiscal year end, really establishing us to be a sustainable and stable operation far into the future. Next slide, please. This slide is just a depiction, as Mr. Delaney just pointed out, of our investment history, how we've been able to leverage those investments to contribute to the sustainability and stability of San Diego Community Power. Next slide. So in closing, Madam Chair, we really demonstrated a solid financial performance in our last fiscal cycle. However, despite the favorable outcome from last year, Community Power continues to face ongoing financial, operational, and regulatory risk. So it's prudent to us to make sure that we can maintain adequate reserve levels that are really critical to supporting our achievement of our strategic goals set by the board with recommendations from the executive team, which you'll hear more about in the next presentation from my colleagues, Mr. Manglamont and Mr. Spengler. Madam Chair, that concludes my presentation of this item. I will now yield back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Washington. Directors, are there any members of the, do you have any comments or question on this item, please? Vice Chair?
I have a few questions. So going back to the slide that shows the non-energy costs.
Yes.
And it showed personnel. I think it was one before this one. Yep, there you go. Thank you. And it shows $2.9 million for the personnel savings, and you mentioned that. So how do you come up with the savings? Is it because You had budgeted for one, but then you saved actually 2.9 million. Is that what it is? And or were there proactive steps that were taken that saved? How do you I guess how do you monetize that, or how do you come up with that?
Yes, that's a great question, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you for asking it. So essentially, the savings in terms of personnel really attribute to, at the time we set the budget, we also overlay a personnel outline in terms of what positions we're adding and the timing that we expect for those positions to come online. So typically what happens is those positions are budgeted for, but not yet seated. And then it also includes some positions that might also be vacant. In addition to that, that also includes all of the other expenses that go along with personnel, including, for example, some benefits and what have you.
I see. So is it then a matter of running a leaner machine, so you don't have as many people filling out those seats, so you're saving money? And so I guess the team is obviously doing a great job because they're running leaner, but they're still doing everything.
Yeah, that's a great point and great comment, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you for that. So what happens is when we set our budget and we look at our personnel schedule, those positions that we identify are actual positions that we really need. We've got an awesome team and an awesome staff with great leaders that are able to still get the work done without those positions yet being filled, but those positions are necessary.
Mhm.
Again, we really take a really hard look at the positions that we add. And we are really mindful of those and want to make sure that we're smart about adding those positions, but those positions are actually needed for the organization. As we continue to grow, as we continue to build out, those positions will be positions that will continue to contribute to our overall success.
Okay, great. And then the next question I have is going to the next slide. From there, I saw a big jump. It went from 65.7 million to 253.4 million. What is attributed to, how did that happen?
Yeah, that's a pretty phenomenal jump. What happens, what you see also in this slide presentation is the onboarding and ramping on of our customers. We've got our rates team here that can really speak more eloquently to this than I can, but essentially during phase one, phase two, we added the various cities and jurisdictions. And then what this shows is this is supported by the full report out, or the full annual earnings of having all of our jurisdictions ramped on. And you see that reflected in our financials. So that's why you see the big jump there.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Hi, Chair Suzuki, or Vice Chair Suzuki, Timothy Mangalmat, Director of Finance. Just to add one more thing to what Dr. Washington was mentioning, because it's a really good segue to the next presentation. One of the big reasons why there was also a big jump is due to the power charge and difference adjustment, which we're going to go into a lot more detail here pretty shortly. But one of the functions that happen is when market prices go from low to high, enables us to collect more in the way of revenue, which is a really good segue into the next presentation.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks for that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Director Inzunza, you have any comments, sir?
No, I'm okay. I'm listening. Thank you for the questions and the inquiries, directors. I'm listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director. This is also a receive and file for year-end 24-25 performance review. Thank you. We'll now go to item number 4, recommend board adoption on resolution number 2025-23, approving a 4th revision to the financial reserves policy. This will be presented by Mr. Tim Likmot, Director of Finance, and Jeb Spengler, Senior Strategic Finance Manager, to present this item. However, Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do not, Madam Chair.
Do not. It's your turn now, Tim and Jeb. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Chair Yamani. Good afternoon, Chair Yamani, Vice Chair Suzuki, Director Nzinza. My name is Timothy Mangalmat, Director of Finance at Community Power, and I'll be joined today by my colleague, Jeb Spengler, Strategic Finance Manager. I have the pleasure today of presenting to you an action item to approve a resolution, or to approve a recommendation to the board to approve a resolution to adopt a 4th amendment to our reserve policy. As I get into this, I do want to take a quick moment just to thank staff. There's a lot of work put into this presentation, so I just want to quickly acknowledge that with all the work that went into this one. With this reserve policy update, we did take a really good approach in terms of trying to be fiscally responsible and trying to look at ways to increase stability for the agency as we went through this reserve policy. So in terms of what we're going to go through today, we're going to start out with a pretty hefty reserve background. One of our big risks to the agency, one of the big reasons why we need reserves, is that power charge indifference adjustment, or PCAA, that I mentioned earlier. So we're going to take a deep dive into that. And then I'll turn over to my colleague, Jeb Spangler, who's going to go over, kind of just a deep dive on this new reserve update that we're proposing for the board. And then last thing I'll mention too is we did take a really prudent approach to developing this reserve policy, and just looked at just different opportunities to just try to lower rates for customers as we made this recommendation. So again, just by way of background, and as Dr. Washington highlighted previously, two of our guiding principles here were our strategic goals that were adopted by our board. Number one is to reach that 180 days cash on hand target. And then number two is to try to achieve an investment grade credit rating, which kind of guided, kind of this analysis. By way of additional background, and just some history about Community Power's reserves. So when Community Power was first established, our first reserve target was 90 days cash on hand. That really was an interim target as we were a startup agency to try to achieve like an interim 90-day cash on hand target. Once we hit that goal, we looked across other investment grade CCAs, which you could see on the chart there. We also have a municipal financial advisor, and just doing an audit of just best practices for these investment grade credit rating agencies. Community Power adopted a 180 days cash on hand goal, kind of in alignment with what we saw across the industry. But really the question is 180 days cash on hand the right reserve target? And one of the big reasons why we need to look at that now is, as Dr. Washington just presented earlier, we're at 90% of achieving our reserve goal as of September. We do expect to hit that reserve target here pretty shortly, around the October-November timeframe, depending on how financials shake out. So now is a really good time to look to see, is that the right goal? And rather than looking across the other investment grade credit rating agencies, we wanted to figure out if that was the right goal, kind of using a bottoms-up approach. So in terms of what the agency has done to try to inform that target and try to figure out, again, is 180 days the right number? We did a lot of things. Kind of the first thing we did is we greatly bolstered our risk management function. So we put together a lot of just subject matter experts within the agency. We meet weekly, and we just greatly bolstered our ability to just analyze risk. We also onboarded what I'm calling an expert risk consultant, who used to be the former CEO of Silicon Valley Clean Energy, who's considered within the CCA industry, kind of one of the leading agencies in terms of risk. The board has also seen many professional services contracts come through, and a lot of those were contracts that gave Community Power the ability to do deeper analyses. One of the ones in particular is Sequant, which gave the ability to the agency to perform stochastic models, to get up-to-date data, and just do different kinds of forecasts that we weren't able to previously do. And then kind of the fourth thing we did is we used American Public Power Association best practices for risk to try to formulate this risk management framework that we use to analyze how much risk we need to inform our reserve target. Sorry, clicker is not clicking at the moment. So what we did is we did a multi-pronged reserve approach to try to inform that reserve target. So the one I'm going to go through right now is I'm calling a bottom-up risk analysis. It's really like the nerdy quantification of just quantifying our risks, using that to see how much reserves we need to mitigate that risk, and kind of just taking a quantification approach to informing the reserve target. My colleague Jeb Spangler is going to go over kind of a validation of that reserve target. So my colleague Jed did a pretty deep dive into our peers in terms of other CCAs and what they've done in terms of their reserve target. He also analyzed the big three credit rating agencies, S&P, Moody's, and Fitch, to help kind of validate that target. And then he also validated the target with just some national medians data, which he'll get into shortly. Sorry, clicker problems there. So in terms of that bottom-up approach that I mentioned earlier, we really did take a pretty thoughtful, cautious, and prudent approach to kind of develop this bottom-up risk analysis. So what you see in front of you are the major risks to community power, and kind of the quantification for each of those risk targets. The way I like to think of this, for example, for your cities, is, imagine if an earthquake hit, right? If an earthquake hit, then your streets would get potentially messed up. The signals in the streets potentially might need to be replaced. And those are things that would need to occur pretty quickly, right? So the reserves that you see on here, or sorry, the risks that you see on here are kind of similar to that kind of emergency situation happening, as opposed to, a risk that could occur where you maybe have a year or longer to plan for. Those risks where you have a kind of a longer lead time to plan for aren't included on this list. Instead, these are really things that are emergency items that you need reserves to mitigate. Kind of go through a couple of these here. You'll notice the first big one on there is market price benchmark volatility, or that PCIA and generation rate that I mentioned earlier. That one by far is the biggest risk to the agency, and we're going to go into that in a lot more detail. To go through a couple more of these, load is another big factor there, right? So then, in terms of participation rates, we did an audit of other CCAs, and some CCAs have dropped down to the 86% participation rate level. And so we use that to model, kind of what would that occur if that were to occur for SDCP. How much would we need in terms of reserves to mitigate that? But then the last one I'll highlight there is energy costs. So that's kind of the all-in risk for energy, and that has a lot of things in there. But one of the examples I'll give is, let's say, for example, the federal administration imposed tariffs on goods to develop solar farms. That's something that would be incorporated kind of in that energy risk cost, and is included in that $245 million line. Mm-hmm. So then the way I like to think of this is you take all those different risks together, and that's kind of the full list that community power needs to mitigate for. So kind of what the punchline is, so we're proposing as a maximum use of reserves of $771 million, or 278 days cash on hand, kind of as an upper reserve band for community power, again, based on all of those different risk factors. Although we recognize that the chance that all of those risk factors actually occurring together is probably pretty minimal. And again, that's part of the reason why we're proposing a range rather than an actual target, since this is the high end of the range. Again, one of the key points that I made earlier is that first row there, $420 million for PCA and generation rates, that composes over half of the reserve kind of target there for the maximum. And so we're going to take a pretty deep dive into that here pretty shortly. Sorry. Sorry. Yeah, I got it. Sorry, clicker problems there. Okay. So, just given the uncertainty in the market, the other proposal that we had in front of the board today too was target reserve of 225 days cash on hand, or 624 million. Kind of the way we quantify that is, this is kind of the more balanced approach. We wanted to make sure that, we just didn't hoard, kind of reserves, and we wanted to protect the agency and maintain stability and kind of take a prudent approach. So kind of that first row there for PCIA and generation snapback, we're proposing as a target range a 65% coverage of that PCA and generation snapback, which we kind of believe is the more stable kind of status quo market price benchmark volatility, just in terms of what a normal cycle would look like. So a target range is at 225 days cash on hand, kind of based on 65% coverage of that PCIA level. Okay. So with all that said, and again, given that the PCIA is really that biggest reserve kind of mitigating factor for the agency, we did want to take a pretty sizable chunk of this presentation to go through what actual PCIA is. It's a pretty dense topic, so hopefully it makes sense, and we don't bore you guys too much with this one. Okay. So PCIA, or the Power Charge Indifference Adjustment, is a state-mandated cost that both SDG&E and SDCP customers must pay. Almost every month, our power services team brings long-term PPAs to this board. When those long-term PPAs come to this board, most of the time, those PPAs last, anywhere between, 10 to 30 years. So just like our long-term PPAs, before SCCP came around, SDG&E similarly contracted for long-term PPAs, and they own their own assets. So this chart's kind of just to illustrate, SDG&E, before we came along, they owned and entered into energy contracts just like we did. Okay. Along came San Diego Community Power back in June 2021 when we started serving customers. And when that occurred, right, SDG&E was left holding the bag with all this energy that they contracted for, and all the energy that they kind of owned, but then they didn't need it, right? So the whole idea then with PCIA is PCIA really is intended to make the IOUs like SDG&E whole for all the energy that they contracted for, but then they don't need, right? So then the idea is if SDG&E has all this energy, all of their a big bulk of their customers transition over to community power and to CEA. The idea then is PCIA makes SDG&E whole for the energy that they already paid for. Okay, so in terms of PCIA then, like what is it really made of? And there's really two layers here for PCIA. And this is kind of getting into a lot more detail in terms of just explaining some numbers on what PCIA is. You'll see two boxes there. PCIA really is made up of two different things. Number one is a forecast, which we call ERA, or Energy Resource Recovery Account for short. But then for the purposes of the presentation, I'll call it forecast. The second part of PCIA is called the true-up, or true-up for short, but then kind of the longer term for it is the Portfolio Allocation Balancing Account, or PABA. But I'll call it true-up since that's really what it is. And when you take that forecast and you take that true-up together, that's how you get to PCIA. Okay, just quick primer here. This is going to get really dense, so bear with us as we go through this presentation. But it's crucially important. And Director Suzuki, you asked earlier, how did you build so much in the way of reserve? Like this really is the answer to that question. So if we're looking at 2026 rates, right, which is going to come up here pretty shortly, and Aaron's going to present here on this pretty shortly. And you look at that first kind of bar there at the top for the forecast portion. When SDG&E sets their 2026 rates, they start in 2025. In this example, we're saying, for renewable prices that SDG&E is paying or had paid $70 per megawatt hour for renewables. And so that's, again, the long-term PPAs that they would have locked in. In this made-up example, we're saying in this made-up example, they paid $70 per megawatt hour. But in 2025, the CPUC projected that renewables in 2026 would cost $62.45 per megawatt hour. So then the idea then is if SDG&E is paying $70, and if the market is saying that those renewables are worth $62.45, right, then SDG&E would sell that renewable in the open market for $62.45, and they would lose $7.55 in the open market, right? So then the whole idea then with PCIA, at least for that first portion for the forecast, is customers need to pay back SDG&E through PCIA for that $7.55 because SDG&E needs to be made whole for the stuff that they bought already. You guys follow so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so that's part one. That's the forecast portion of PCIA. One last thing I'll mention too is if, let's say, it went in the opposite direction, right? Like if SDG&E paid. Actually, I'll go to that example here in a second. Okay, so that's the forecast portion of PCIA. Kind of the next portion at the bottom is that true-up portion that I mentioned earlier. So again, imagine we're in 2026, right? We're trying to set rates for 2026. In order to figure out the true-up portion, we need to go back in time, back to 2024. So back in 2024, SDG&E was setting rates for 2025. Again, imagine that SDG&E is paying $70 per megawatt hour for the renewable energy. Back in 2024, the CPUC thought that renewable energy in the open market would sell for $71.24. And so again, if you just take the difference here, $70 minus $71.24, SDG&E in this case is making $1.24 in the open market. Okay, so then in this case, SDG&E owes our customers through PCIA $1.24 per megawatt hour. Okay, and again, this is a forecast of what the CPUC thought prices would be for 2025. And again, we're trying to set 2026 rates here. Okay, so you get to actual 2025, kind of at the end of the year in 2025, the CPUC says, okay, let's see what the actual price was for renewables for that year. Okay, so in this case, the actual price ended up being $63.86. So then again, you just take that $71.24, you minus $63.86, which is what the market is actually paid during the year. Then SDG&E now needs to be made whole $7.38 for the PCIA. And again, this happens kind of in late 2025, so right about now. So then sorry, I'm not sure what's happening there. That went way forward. Sorry. Bear with me here. I need to back this up a few slides, like 10 or 15 slides.
There.
Almost. Almost. God, that stole my punchline, but that's okay. Okay, so then so then back to this made up example here, right? So then in this case, that $7.38 from like the actual market price, SDG&E needs to be made whole, right? And that true up happens in 2026. So again, this is like a 2-year cycle. It started in 2024. The actual prices came out, and then we're making SDG&E whole for $7.38. Okay, so that is the true up portion of PCIA. So then if you just take those two things together, right? So again, there's that forecast for what we thought we need to pay SDG&E. And then we also need to true up SDG&E for what they paid in 2025. And like those two things together, the forecast and the true up, that really is what PCIA is. Director Suzuki, you asked the question earlier, like how the heck did you guys make so much money in the way of reserves? So I'm just gonna make up an example here, right? But let's say that the price was $20 per megawatt hour for what SDG&E was paying. If the price for that renewables went up, let's say to like $70 during the year, right? So SDG&E, they paid $20, they would make $70 in the market. So then because the market price is 70, and SDG&E paid 20, they'd make $50 in the market. So the idea then is if the price goes up, then SDG&E makes a bunch of money, right? Through the resources that they can sell in the open market. So when that happens, then it's kind of net positive for the agency, because then you'll see here in a slide pretty shortly on how we calculate rates. But because SDG&E makes money, then that PCIA, kind of turns negative. And because of that, it allows community power to get more in the way of reserves. So when you look at that 2023 reserve build, that's kind of the mechanism that played out back then. Okay. So I know that was a pretty deep dive into PCIA, but then again, the idea is that forecast plus that true up equals PCIA. Yeah. Okay. So Director Suzuki, kind of getting to your question here too. So when we look at community powers rates, I mean, this chart kind of compares community powers rates over time, and kind of SDG&E's also rates over time. There's a couple things to talk through here. So when SDG&E sets their rates for any given year, right? When we try to calculate our discount, there's two components for how we calculate our discount. That blue bar is what we collect in terms of revenue, right? So it's like whatever dollar per megawatt or kilowatt hour that we collect in terms of revenue. That orange bar is the PCIA. We don't collect that from the customers or from SDG&E in terms of revenue. That's paid by the customers. But then those two things together factor into the discount, right? So if PCIA grows like super big, then that means that it's harder to have a discount because we don't collect that orange portion, but it seeps into that discount with SDG&E, if that makes sense. In 2025, you see it turned negative. So that allows us to have a bigger discount to SDG&E because of that PCIA kind of mechanism that plays out, if that makes sense. I guess the other kind of important point with this slide is, I mean, if you just look at PCIA and SDG&E's generation rates, since 2021, it's been very volatile, right? Like it goes up and down pretty substantially there. And, you know, that's kind of one of the main reasons why, you know, getting back to, you know, that main PCIA reserve, $420 million like reserve build, because of that volatility, like that's one of the big reasons why that number is so high, because the market's so volatile. And we kind of need that big reserve to mitigate against that. Okay. Sorry, the clicker. So the California Public Utilities Commission of the CPUC, they're the ones who set those market price benchmarks. You can see just since 2021, those market price benchmarks that kind of define PCIA, again, they've been very volatile. In 2021, they were low. They've been growing pretty substantially there since 2025. But you know, kind of the punchline here is it's been very volatile, and that's kind of led to these big PCIA fluctuations. That's kind of been forming that reserve target. Again, right now, those market price benchmarks are very high. But if you just think of that mechanic where if prices are high, then let's say they dip low, then that means that the PCIA is going to increase and the SDG needs to be made whole because they're paying, in that example, $70 per megawatt hour. And then if the prices go low, they need to be made whole for more if those prices go down. Okay, so you'll see here, in 2021, those market prices were actually low in 2021. So, you know, with this new risk function that we kind of developed here, we did model this, you know, kind of through this risk framework that we set up to do a stress test to see, okay, you know, in 2026, what would happen to community power if prices dipped back down to those 2021 levels? And so we ran a stress test scenario that you'll see right here pretty shortly. So in this stress test scenario, if market prices dip back to 2021 levels, we would lose potentially $331 million or 120 days cash on hand. Again, due to that big PCIA and rates kind of line item that you saw earlier. We use 2021 as an example because that actually occurred as a market price historically. So it's something that we think can actually occur. We did a second stress test scenario here too. So when you look at our sister CCAs to the north, the ones that are in the PG&E territories, they're actually experiencing this kind of phenomenon where PCIA is increasing and then PG&E is lowering their rates. So we modeled that as a stress test scenario. We also added in, you know, if that occurred and let's say, for example, you know, community power had a bunch of opt-outs because let's say we raised our rates, you know, what would happen in that scenario too? And then we model kind of a third thing here with uncollectibles increasing, let's say with like a natural disaster, like a flood occurring where customers can't pay their bills. So in this example, again, using what's actually happening to our sister CCAs in the north, we would lose 238 million or 99 days cash on hand kind of in this stress test scenario. So with all that said, that's kind of one of the big reasons why PCIA is such a big factor to community power. It can affect our reserves pretty substantially here. And so, you know, we aren't sitting on our hands in terms of trying to mitigate that. There are two kind of big areas that we're trying to mitigate against PCIA. The first is we are trying to put pressure on the CPUC to just kind of revise their rules for PCIA and volatility. So that's kind of point number one. And then point number two is actually the point of this presentation, right? Like we're proposing an amendment to the reserve policy and to that reserve target to try to mitigate against kind of that big band of risk, especially from PCIA and market price benchmark volatility. So with that said, that's how we came up with that new range. Again, it's 180 days as the floor, 225 days as the target, and then 270 is like the maximum reserve range. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Jeb, to talk to you about the validation portion.
Good afternoon, Chair Yamani and members of the committee. Jeb Spengler, Senior Strategic Finance Manager. As part of the internal risk working group, we considered all of the information that Tim just presented as well as additional information that I'll share with you here today. And we took all this information into account when we established our new reserve policy proposal that we'll present here in just a moment. The reserve policy we're presenting, reserve policy we're establishing has 3 key points, as Tim just alluded to. The minimum reserve amount of 180 days cash on hand is set to protect against the short-term risks, which ensure operational continuity and align with industry standards. And as we've continued to mention over time, helps us establish an investment-grade credit rating, which has been one of the strategic priorities. The 225-day target is to cover normal cyclical fluctuations to the market price benchmarks that Tim just showed. Also just regular ongoing volatility, and it's designed to protect us from going below the 180-day minimum. So we could address normal cyclical volatility, but still not dip below that 180-day minimum target that we're setting. And finally, the maximum reserve amount provides sufficient protection from some of the more significant fluctuations in market volatility and the stress scenario that Tim showed with the major risk events, the PCIA snapback, and assuming that a lot of those could happen at the same time. This slide highlights energy market volatility as represented by natural gas spot market prices. These prices are commonly used as an indicator for energy costs broadly. This is a good reminder that volatility isn't a one-off event and that it's cyclical and can be driven by overlapping events in the small blue boxes, which are a little hard to read. But these highlight where weather patterns, energy storage buildouts, or broader financial market collapses, similar to what happened in the pandemic. Seeing this volatility highlights the fact that estimates into the future, even 1 year out, can be murky at best. And because volatility is structural and multi-year, our risk-based reserves bands are designed to absorb these risks over time. A set dollar amount of 180 days at one point in time might actually only be 150 days cash a few weeks later, or vice versa. So our proposal to have a target of 225 days ensures community power is highly unlikely to drop below the 180 days cash on hand, and be able to withstand normal cyclical volatility. This is a snapshot of a financial reserve projection that we made at the end of September. As of our most recent audit from June 30, 2025, we finished the year at 115 days of unrestricted cash and investments. That number is a little different from, I think, the number that we've presented in the past, which is net position. And I'll explain that difference here as we get into our policy specifically. But as of the 9/30, it's just September 30 projections, our reserves were projected to grow to 213 days cash on hand by the end of fiscal 2026. Aside from that base case scenario we showed you, and this is touching on the same stress case that Tim pointed out just a moment ago, this is the 2021 benchmark, market price benchmark scenario stress. And this just looks to see how much in reserves we'd use. And based on our models, if we continue our financial practices through this positive, we'd be able to weather the storm of a 2021 market price, assuming that's the only risk that we face at that time. Under this stress scenario, we'd have a low balance of 120 days cash in the early part of 27. However, we could recover back to the 180 days by October 2027. And under this scenario, we would still likely be able to maintain the public investment credit grade rating and continue to pass on savings to our customers. We've mitigated the risks, but as Tim mentioned earlier, we also want to ensure that our strategy and our thresholds are in alignment with this multi-pronged validation approach. We did this through a comparison of our CCA peers, but also through other energy industry benchmarks, recommendations, and best practices. First, we looked at the financial reserve policies of all of the CCAs. The range that we are proposing is similar in amount of days cash on hand compared to other CCAs, and adopts a range like some of the more well-established CCAs such as Silicon Valley Clean Energy and Ava Community Energy. For reference purposes, the orange bars represent the target for each. The blue-green bars show the minimum or maximum if the CCA has such a policy. And then the horizontal blue line, which I have more information on in the next slide, that actually shows the CCA's latest audited financial numbers. So you can see how their actual cash balances compare to their reserve policies. So we took a look at each of the CCA's audited financial data and did a apples to apples comparison of basically unrestricted cash and investments across the board. And this is all of the CCA's most recent audit information that we were able to obtain. So this has our most recent 2025 data. As you can see, we're on the lower end of our peers with the latest audited financial data. We want to make sure that we're taking an approach to reserve building that gives our customers the lowest rates while continuing to be financially responsible. So that's why our reserve build has been gradual outside of the large jump that Vice Chair Suzuki pointed out earlier. After looking at our peers, we analyzed their criteria of the three largest nationally recognized credit rating agencies, Moody's, S&P, and Fitch. Moody's highest credit rating tier requires more than 250 days of reserves, while its next tier, which is still considered strong, requires approximately 175 to 249 days cash on hand. Next is S&P. S&P, similar to Moody's, has a very strong assessment, which requires 150 and more than 270 days of liquidity for the highest assessment possible. And finally, Fitch, which is my old employer, has the least specific criteria with liquidity requiring 90 days to just be considered neutral to the overall rating. They do give some additional credit for higher liquidity balances. But given our reserve range and our target, we're confident that we'd be able to attain and maintain a strong investment grade public credit rating within the next year. And finally, while comparing community power to public power utility medians data is more of an apples to oranges comparison, we still evaluated the median number of days cash on hand public power organizations maintain at the various investment grade credit ratings that you see here. Based on community power's stated goals and the likelihood of achieving them barring an unforeseen risk, we should be able to, again, obtain and maintain investment grade credit rating within the next year. And now I will go into the details of the actual policy that we're presenting. The key language changes that we are seeking are as follows. We're changing the goal from 180 days cash on hand to a range that features the 180 days as a floor, the recommended target of 225 days cash, and then the maximum of 270 days cash on hand. We're also updating, as I mentioned earlier, the definition of reserves to be more specific to define liquidity available if we have an emergency. And so we're redefining what we had defined as reserves as net position to now be unrestricted cash equivalents, and investments that are unencumbered by legal agreements and not earmarked for specific purposes. That same language was actually in our policy. It just wasn't the definition for what the reserves number was. We're also updating the purpose and intent of our reserve balance thresholds. The policy states that the board should ensure that reserves don't drop below the minimum unless it's necessary to address a reserve event, such as major volatility in energy costs, an increase in uncollectible accounts, or just to enable sufficient working capital, and most importantly, to stabilize customer rates. Should a circumstance occur where reserves would be above the maximum balance, the board may evaluate opportunities for strategic investments, programmatic funding, or other purposes as determined by the board. And as part of the reserve policy change, and this is an important one, we're also recommending that any reserves over the 225 days cash target, but below the maximum, could be designated as rate stabilization funds. Those particular funds could be used on an ongoing basis to stabilize rates through volatility. This is a policy that has some accounting nuances that require its own separate policy. So we'll be bringing that back to the board in early 2026. And just to wrap up, our customers deserve rate stability, predictability, and choice for years to come. And we think that this policy ensures that for us and our customers going forward. And with that, I think I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Jeb. Thank you, Mr. Spangler. Thank you so much, Dr. Washington and Tim, for that. This is, are there any comments from our directors, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Vice Chair? No, go ahead.
I clearly feel like the beginning student in this class, so the first question I have is, so you mentioned that you have a risk management team, right? And you meet weekly. So what kinds of things, I mean, I'm just curious because, I mean, are you guys using that meeting? You guys go back and you reevaluate and then you do things to tweak things so that you're not?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Director Suzuki. Eric, I can take this one. That's okay. Yeah. So it's actually the American Public Power Association with their risk framework. It's actually pretty common to kind of have like an ongoing risk team like that. We're not just looking at reserves every week. There's, I think, kind of a wide array of just risks to the agency. So, the weekly meeting can address, I don't know, tariffs, for example, when they come up, or it could address reserves, which we're going through now. It's kind of a wide variety of just different things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I was just curious because it sounds like, I mean, that's good that you're constantly looking at it. The other question I have as well, I guess I don't, it was about market price benchmark volatility. And you'd mentioned that that's probably the most important. So that has to do with the PCIA, correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks for the question. Through the chair, Director Suzuki, yeah, that really is, that's the biggest by far. I think it's like 54% of that reserve target.
Yeah.
When I mentioned market price benchmarks and PCIA, in that example that I illustrated earlier, for those CPUC prices that I mentioned, those were market price benchmarks. So yeah, so market price benchmarks really are the key for the when the CPUC kind of projects what they think the price is going to be, and then they'll come up with an actual market price benchmark for the actual price in those calculations.
Okay, and then the third question I have is, so I looked at everything and I want the best grade. I'm sure all of us feel like that. So, but you folks are saying that 225 days is good, that 225 days cash on hand, but that would get us, I guess that would, S&P would be, or one of them is S&P wants more than 270 days, correct, to get the highest rating. Am I right? Yeah, I'm sorry.
I can add more color to this. So currently, I think there are maybe 10 CCAs that are currently rated. I'd have to go back and look. Nobody is rated higher than a single A flat, like so no plus, no minus, no double A's. The highest rated, I take that back. There might be one or two that the ones that are associated with the cities might actually have an A plus. But that's because they have access to SFPUC and San Jose, yes. So they have access to additional resources. But all of the standalone CCAs have no greater than a single A credit rating from S&P at least. So using the S&P criteria specifically, it's unlikely that we would see at least an immediate improvement in our rating above a single A as a result of higher cash balances. I think having the 180 days as a floor maintains our ability to ensure that we can maintain an investment grade A or within the A category over time. I think that's kind of what our thinking has been. And based on the comparison of the CCAs and the reserves that they have and their ratings, if you overlap the ratings on top of that, you'll see that the higher rated CCAs all maintain basically 180 days or more.
Okay, got it.
Can I add one more thing to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so just one other, just to hammer Jeb's point home and through the chair. in Jeb's chart earlier, Sonoma Clean Power had, I think, well over 300 days cash on hand, and they're still at an A credit rating, right? So then, I think it just kind of hammers home the point that even with a large cash balance, you don't necessarily get upgraded. I'll put in one other point there. Sonoma did do their rate setting, I think, in their last board meeting. And again, I mentioned that example in that stress test about PG&E territories. They are proposing to dip into their reserves with moving a big portion of it. So it's almost it's almost like what we're presenting has played out at those PG&E territories.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment? This is a recommendation to the board to adopt resolution number 2025-23, approving a fourth revision to the financial reserve policy. There, you can see all the revisions that are there, and thank you. I like that rate stabilization fund that will come back later on, but that is the recommendation. What's the say of the board?
I move to recommend to the bigger board to adopt the proposed reserves.
Second.
Thank you. So recommendation is to recommend board adoption of resolution number 2025-23, approving a fourth revision to the financial reserve policy. I have a motion and a second. If there are no other comments, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Director Insunza,
Yes.
Vice Chair Suzuki,
Aye.
Chair Yamani,
Aye.
motion carries.
Thank you. We'll now move on to item 5, update on SDG&E's 2026 projected rates. This is going to be presented by Mr. Aaron Liu, Rates and Strategy Manager. And before that, Mary, do we have any public comment for this item?
We do not, Madam Chair.
No, it's your floor, Mr. Liu.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, directors of the committee, staff, as well as members of the general public. It's my pleasure to provide an update on SDG&E's latest 2026 projected rates outlook this afternoon. So just to set the stage in terms of where we are, in late November, early December, we've just received SDG&E's latest filing to the Public Utilities Commission on their preliminary 2026 rates outlook. So we'll highlight some of the information in those set of rates. We are also expecting a final set of rates that SDG will publish for 2026 at the end of the year on December 31st. So we'll be coming back to provide another update when those rates are up. And here are our rate development policy objectives for community power. It's, I think, a theme for this afternoon. A lot of these Tim and Jeb, as well as Eric, have already mentioned in the earlier presentations today. And I see these as our guiding principles as we go through the rate development process. It's really a delicate balance of all of these objectives in terms of setting our rates. I think Tim did an excellent job on the power charge indifference adjustment, but this is a different way to look at it from the rate setting perspective. I just want to go over the different components of rates as well as of a electric utility bill. So in terms of generation rates, as community power as well as SDG&E, we charge customers for the purchase of generating electricity, right? These are for the purchase of power through our either long-term contracts or shorter-term contracts. For the SDG&E delivery, SDG&E charges customers for the use of their distribution and transmission assets. So that will show up on the delivery side of customers' bills. Power charge indifference adjustment was already talked about comprehensively today. It's another way of looking at it is the above market costs or departing exit fee that's related to power purchase commitments that were made by all investor-owned utilities, so SDG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, as well as Southern California Edison, on behalf of customers before those customers moved to their community choice aggregation programs. We also have the franchise fee as the last line item, and it's a surcharge applied to really the transport over the different transmission and distribution assets for the use of the public right of way. And the graphics just an illustrative example of the latest joint rate comparison showing the breakdown of these different rate components. So we always talk about rate trifurcation here, as well as why we have Community Power have 3 sets of rates. Just as a reminder, really to achieve equity, we have to do it that way. And the main underlying reason is that in order to achieve equity, to provide the same opportunity as well as the value prop for all of our customers, because of the PCIA, because of the PCIA is vintage, we have to set 3 sets of rates. And as in the future, if we ever get additional load, then there will be additional vintages. So right now we are still recommending 3 sets of rates moving forward. How that works mechanically, Community Power has 4 phases of customers, but 3 vintages. So phase 1 and phase 2 customers, when they moved from SDG&E to Community Power, they were assigned a PCIA of vintage 2020. And then the later phases have vintages 2021 and 2022 accordingly. And those vintages are really assigned different PCIAs because SDG&E allocated different years of their portfolio to those customers. That's why there's different vintages. And due to really the substantial and significant deltas between the PCIAs of the different vintages, in order to provide the same value prop, Community Power has to set 3 sets of rates. So if you look at it graphically, Tim also mentioned earlier, how we really calculate our rates is looking at SDG&E's bundle generation, subtracting the PCIA, subtracting the franchise fee, and then calculating the discount. So from this graphic, in order to provide the same value prop, as I said, we have to have different sets of Community Power generation. So focusing on what SDG&E published in their latest November outlook. For all of these next tables on the next few slides, they're all in the same manner, just walking through the tables. We have the customer classes going down the leftmost column, the different 5 customer classes, and then the system total average on the bottom. And then the next 3 columns to the right are our current effective rates from SDG&E, SDG&E's outlook when they published that in October, and then the latest from their November. And then the last 2 columns are the rate changes between currently effective to their October outlook, and then to their current effective to their November outlook. So you can see that there's a significant difference between the 2026 expected rates between their October filing and their November filing, right? The October filing was showing a almost 20% system total increase. Now it's almost dropped by half, okay? But it's still a rate increase. Yeah. But overall for bundled customers, a little bit of relief, but rates are still going up. And SDG attributes this increase in their commodity rates to decreased credit because of the PCI true-up that Tim mentioned earlier, as well as revenues from lower market values. So we'll see that on the next slide because the market price benchmarks, those prices are coming down. So the PCIA, we saw the concepts, we talked about it conceptually. Here are the actual numbers of the PCIA. Table again is structured the same as before. We have the customer classes going down, and then current effective PCIA. So for 2025, it's a credit to customers. They're all negative. And in 2026, October and November, they're all going to increase. And projected right now, the latest filing PCI rates are going to go up by approximately 4 cents per kilowatt hour. Just to round out the whole picture, delivery rates, just controlled solely by SDG&E, delivery rates are going up by system total, but it's not an increase that's even across different customer classes. So some customer classes are going to see increases, some are going to see decreases. And this is still subject to change. There's still some pending items that may have significant costs that are still outstanding at the Public Utilities Commission. I just received the email. They're still working out, for example, the wildfire mitigation costs. That's still ongoing.
17.26.
So outside of all of those items are usually the general status quo. We see it every year. SDG&E also wrapped up their general rate case phase 2. It was delayed from 2024, finally wrapped up in 2025. So on top of just the rate changes of the values themselves, of the rates themselves, there's also some rate design and structural changes that are upcoming as well. And those changes are going to be implemented in 2 phases. So phase 1 will coincide with the January 1st rate change, and then phase 2 will happen on April 1st. So I just want to highlight some of those rate changes. But one of the really big wins for community power and for, I think, all the CCAs is it's been many years that the CCAs have been advocating to split out a PCIA charge line item on SDG&E's bundled customer bills. Okay, so all the CCAs have a separate PCI line item. It's been very confusing for customers because they see that, they compare that to perhaps their neighbors or friends' SDG&E bundle bill, or if they were previously a SDG&E customer, they see this as a new line item and they think it's an additional charge that SDG&E customers don't receive, but CCA customers do. But in reality, all customers pay into the PCIA. So starting next year, SDG&E will finally have to split the PCIA line item out of their bundle generation into a separate line item. It really provides a lot more transparency for the customers and the ability for customers to better understand their usage as well as their bills. So the other 3 main items that are coming out of the general rate case, the first one, seasonality adjustment. So typically customers pay more in their summer rates, summer usage compared to winter. Some of that volatility will be reduced moving forward. It's a catch up for SDG&E to move towards reducing volatility between summer and winter. And then the 2 other items is alignment of time of use, expansion. So special super off peak right now that only occurs in March and April from 10 to 2 p.m. That is going to be expanded across the year to the rest of the other 10 months. That will be happening on April 1st. And then the last item is a carve out of a new medium commercial class, really to take a more specific look on what is the cost of service for providing service to that class of customers, and are they paying the right rates to be served by SDG&E. So for the April 1st items, we're likely to see another filing from SDG&E end of April, and then we'll probably come back to the committee as well as the board. So in terms of next steps, we'll continue, as we always do, monitor filings coming from SDG&E, as well as any regulatory or legislative changes coming from both the Public Utilities Commission and the state legislature as well. So both SDG&E commodity rates and PCI rates really goes into informing community power's rate development. So we are well underway into our rate development cycle as well. Again, we'll continue to recommend trifurcation of rates, and as well as adopting a rate change on the January 15th board meeting. So we'll be coming back early in the year with the final set of information that will inform our rates that SDG&E will provide end of December. And then in addition, because there's some rate design changes, you'll likely see us again after the January rate setting meeting, probably in March, for perhaps additional rate adjustments that we will make from requests from the board. So that wraps up my presentation, and happy to take any questions and or comments.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lu. Directors, do you have any question to this presentation? This is a receive and file update on the 2026 SDG&E's projected rates.
No, thank you. I'm good.
Thank you, Director, Vice Chair. No, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lu. I think that's a good win for being transparent, just like what you had said. I think that's a good win for us. Thank you for our ratepayers. Thank you, sir, for your presentation. This is a recommendation for this item. It's receive and file. So, Madam Secretary, that's a receive and file. Are there any committee member announcements? Directors?
Yes.
Yes, Vice Chair.
Yeah, I think I wanted to thank everyone for this deep dive into everything. I don't think I'll ever forget that phrase now. Thank you, Tim. You said it like several times. And also clicker problems. But thank you. I appreciate it. No, I really did, because it's a lot of work and the numbers don't not necessarily come naturally to some of us who are not, well versed in this kind of thing. So you made it actually make sense. So I do appreciate it, because we have to go back to our communities and explain to them what's going on, and so we owe it to them. And thank you for doing the work and helping us make it make sense for them.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Director, Inzunza, you're good?
Appreciate everyone's patience. Thank you for the detailed briefings yesterday, and I really appreciate all the presentations. Very thorough and easy to follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, directors. Thank you to staff, our CEO. Thank you. Yes, CEO, please.
I just want to say thank you for the incredible work of our finance team, Eric, Tim, Jeb, and our rates team, Lucas, Aaron, and also the other folks here. They have put so much time and effort into this. They have done a great job educating our board, our team, and I just really want to say kudos and thank you. I know the amount of work that went into this, and I really appreciate it on behalf of our entire team. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Karen. Thank you so much. Thank you so much again for the team. I know we're gonna repeat this presentation at the board level and educate us again, but thank you for your patience, and we'll see you at our board meeting on Thursday. When is this? Oh, this brings us to our agenda. I appreciate everyone's participation today. The next regular FRMC meeting will be held on Thursday, February 19, 2026 at 4 p.m. at the Chula Vista Council Chambers. Thank you, Councilmember Insunza, for making that happen. Thank you all. We'll see you at our board meeting. Thank you and have a nice day. We are adjourned.
Thank you.